name is William C. Rorick. I'm a portrait painter of historical famous people. I have 5 academic degrees, and starting with a BA from Ohio Wesleyan, and then I got a Bachelor of Music degree from the University of Utah, and then a Master of Music History from Northwestern University, and then a Master of Library Science degree from Pratt Institute, and then a Master of Arts degree in musicology from New York University. I took portrait painting classes beginning in 1990 from Daniel Green in North Salem, New York State, and been working at it ever since. My parents weren't really thrilled about my pursuing portrait painting, but by 1990 I was on my own, and retired from Queens College Music Library in 1995, thereabouts, but continued on with what I really like to do from then on, and that is paint portraits, particularly of famous historical figures that are deceased, mainly. And that's what I'm doing now. It's what I was born to do, I guess. The historical stuff started about 5 years ago, 10 years ago now. And I've always loved history. It was just an evolution sort of matter, I guess. I always loved history, and I loved art and music, and it just was a natural sort of evolution of my interests. And my favorite portrait painter was Thomas Sully, lived in Philadelphia, and also like Sir Thomas Lawrence, English portrait painter. And other people have influenced me, like John Howard Sandon, and well, Daniel Green, of course, is where it all started. The opportunity to bring these famous people back to life have been forgotten, these historical figures, composers particularly, classical composers, and I've always loved classical music. And so I combine that love of classical music with my art interests to create what I'm doing now. And recently I've branched out and are painting other types of historical people, famous historical people. Currently working on a portrait of Virginia Woolf, woman, and I've painted other women. Clara Schumann was the wife of Robert Schumann, and recently Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of the Christian Science religion. And that one now is up in the museum up in Massachusetts called the Longyear Museum. And I just took it up there the other day and donated it to. And that's what my goal is now, to donate my portraits to historical places and houses. I started out in business because my dad was in insurance business in Ohio, and he wanted me to major in business at Ohio Wesleyan, where he graduated in 1922 is when he graduated there. So I got a BA, but I had a minor in fine arts back in those days, though. That was back when I was really young, and in college. And then later on, I don't know, I just pursued my interests in art and music, and now I'm realizing where that direction was going to end up, and I think it's going to end up now doing what I love to do the most, and bringing these famous people back to life. What I do is I get black and white photos, that's all there's available for these off the internet. And then I work from the black and white photos, and I create the color myself, the flesh color and so on. And you know, that's one thing about the flesh tones, is that flesh varies. It can, for the same person, it can change depending on the temperature of the light source. It can be either warm, a light source, or like fluorescent, or cool. I mean, a cool light source like fluorescent, or warm like incandescent. So who's to say what the exact color of the skin was? I mean, it varies. So I've developed formulas for painting flesh tones, and so that's what I depend on. And of course, a lot of these people wore black outfits back then, white shirts, black outfits, and gray jackets or whatever. So it's pretty easy to create the color in these portraits. I have certain portrait painters, historically speaking, that I admired, and a lot of that inspired me to get going. And one of them was Thomas Sully, S-U-L-L-Y. He lived in Philadelphia, and he painted over 2,000 portraits in his lifetime. Very famous in the 19th century in his time, and he lived to be 89 years old, I think. And another one that he admired was in England, and that portrait painter is named Sir Thomas Lawrence. I think a lot of it has to do with contrast. That's an important artistic principle. And with Sully, you notice that he liked dark backgrounds and light in the face, so to create that sense of drama. And the same with Lawrence and other portrait painters. I think that's an important artistic principle, is contrast of light versus dark, because that helps to center your attention where you want the viewer to look first, and like a center of interest. And I think that's probably the most important principle you can. And also color intensity can be a factor in like a bright color versus a grayed out color of the same hue. Can be a factor to center your attention. And those two principles, I think, are very important. I think the main person was my wife, who is now deceased, unfortunately, and she passed away about 3 or 4 years ago. She played the cello. She went to Indiana University and played the cello, and studied with Janos Starker, a famous cello teacher there. And I met her at Northwestern University when I was working on my Master of Music in Music History. She was getting her master's in cello and music education. So we both got our masters in the same year, 1970, and we both came to New York City. And in fact, one night coming out of Orchestra Hall in Chicago, we'd go there about every week to hear the Chicago Symphony. I told her, you know, I'd like to live on a triangle between New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, because I like history and art and music and all that. So she didn't say much. She went and just got a job in Westport, Connecticut, as teaching public school music. So the year after that, then we got married in '71. I got my job in '70 at Manhattan School of Music Library to start my career that way. And but she was great cellist, played in orchestras, and we had that common interest of classical music. But she was very lively and happy, kind of like she liked sunflowers and Shasta daisies and all that. And we had a dog. We had a dog named Spunky. He's a Westie, West Highland White Terrier. during those years. They were happy years, I must say. 2 years after I started at Manhattan School doing the orchestra music and performance music and answering reference questions and so on, I applied to get a library degree, Master of Library Science at Pratt Institute, because I liked the library work. But I still worked at Manhattan those 2 years that I worked on my library degree at Pratt. But in '74, after I got my library degree, I applied for a job at Queens College, part of City University of New York. And I went there in '74 as music reference librarian. And that's where I spent the rest of my professional career in the library world. I retired from Queens College in 1995. But the art started, I started taking the art courses in 1990, 5 years before I retired from the music library. And the art sort of took over, and then I retired in '95 and continued ever since, taking workshops and art classes. And that's where I'm at now, combining art and music and in this way with historical famous composers and other famous historical figures. And I did a portrait of Ulysses S. Grant, and that now currently is up in Wilton, New York State, at the Grant Cottage. And the one I did of Ulysses S. Grant. If I had enough time left, I would do portraits of all the presidents, but I don't know if I have that much time left. And, but anyway, so. If I had to summarize my life's work, I would use one word that is extremely important in any field you go into, and that's diligence, if you want one word, which I interpret as being getting proper education, pursuing your interests to the nth degree, and take as many classes as you possibly can in order to reach your goal. And hard work and getting the, this all comes from my dad. That's what he preached always, hard work. And he didn't retire himself from the insurance business until he was 82 years old. And his main advice was, I think, was hard work. That's what it takes. And diligence, I would stick to this, as my mom would say. Never give up.